My son called me a backstabbing rat after I cut him off for abandoning his wife and daughter for his mistress. I don't know where I failed as a parent, but I know it's time to set him straight. I have 2 children, Bob and Alice. This is about Bob. He used to be married to Ruth, but 5 years ago, Ruth found out Bob was cheating on her while she was pregnant with my granddaughter. I was very disappointed in my son. I raised him better than that. After Ruth found out, we had a big fight. I told Bob how upset I was. How could he do that to his wife? Bob yelled that I was his mother, not Ruth's, and I should take his side. I told him no, I couldn't support what he did. Bob was mad and left, and I only saw him at the divorce hearings. I tried calling him and left messages, but he never answered. Ruth didn't have family, so she always thought of me as her mother. Even after the divorce, she kept visiting me, and we stayed close. She still called me Mom, and I loved spending time with her and my granddaughter. 3 years ago, I set Ruth up with John, the son of my best friend Patty. They hit it off, and John became a great father figure to Ruth's daughter. Recently, Ruth and John got married. Ruth asked me to walk her down the aisle because she walked alone when she married Bob. I was happy to do it. When Bob found out, he was furious. He called me and said I shouldn't be talking to Ruth since they were divorced. He told me not to go to the wedding. I told him he was being unreasonable. His poor choices were the reason we were in this situation, and I wasn't going to cut Ruth off. I didn't listen to Bob and went to the wedding anyway. When he heard, he called me a backstabbing rat and said I had chosen Ruth over him. He said I was a hypocrite because I didn't go to his wedding. He married the woman he cheated with, but went to Ruth's. My husband thinks Bob has a point, but Alice disagrees. Was I wrong to go to Ruth's wedding? Update. My husband died when my daughter was only 5. Bob was shocked by his father's death, and I did my best to comfort him. I took him to therapists and trauma experts, who all said he was a good boy and very well behaved. The only father figure Bob had was his uncle, my brother, who was a disciplined and nice man. Since my children were little, I tried my best to be a good parent. I stopped dating for a long time to focus on them. I taught them important life lessons and told them about their father, who was a man of dignity and morals. He never sacrificed his principles to please others. I always tried to be both parents, but I guess I wasn't enough. My son started dating Ruth, a 28-year-old woman, when he was 20. They met at a restaurant where Ruth worked part-time. I liked Ruth. She was well-mannered and had a good heart. I told my son he picked the right woman. Bob was head over heels for her, and they got married 2 years later. Ruth finished her degree early and got a job as a teacher at 22. I noticed my son didn't like Ruth's job. He complained about her odd hours, which seemed irrational since she was a kindergarten teacher. I explained to him that Ruth has her own life outside of his. I told him to discuss his concerns with her. He said he understood, and things were calm for a year. A year later, they started fighting again. Ruth wanted to pursue her master's degree. She was still young and wanted to do something meaningful with her degree. I supported her because she was a prodigy, but my son objected, thinking it would cause trouble. I tried to stay out of their conflict until Ruth came to me and said Bob threatened to leave her if she pursued her master's degree. I gave my son an earful. I was offended because I worked hard to support my family and now have my own business. It is disappointing to me that my son has such backward thinking. A few weeks later, Ruth told me she was pregnant. She forgot all about her master's degree. I tried to support her as much as possible. Later, Ruth found out my son was cheating on her with a mutual friend. Ruth was devastated. I called a family meeting. Ruth cried and asked Bob, "How could you do this to me?" Bob said, "Ruth doesn't love me. She doesn't make me feel special. Her friend always fulfills my needs and understands me better." He felt he was wasting his 20s by staying with a woman who always fought with him. I asked what the fights were about and what Ruth did to make him so angry. He said, "Her whole existence bothers me. She cares more about her education than me. If she were a good wife, she would be a housewife instead of going out." I reminded him that I also had higher education. He said, "That is different." They argued a lot. My son called her a witch the whole time. Moreover, he is an absent father to his daughter. He pays child support but barely spends time with her. He went low contact when I told him I would not support his infidelity. I met his mistress because he insisted I give her a chance and said I would change my mind about Ruth after meeting her. But he was wrong. His mistress was not a nice person. My gut told me she was not good-hearted either. She made an odd comment that she was saving my son from a bad marriage and I should be happy for him. I told him I would not attend his wedding if he married the woman who wrecked his home. I know my son is more to blame, but she knew Ruth and Bob were married. Recently, Ruth married John, my friend's son. Ruth asked me to walk her down the aisle. My son heard about it and called me all sorts of vile names. He forbade me to go to her wedding and called me a hypocrite because I did not attend his wedding, but I was going to Ruth's. I told him to calm down and talk to me when he was not acting like a baby. I feel like a failure, like I failed my late husband too. My late husband would be disappointed in our son as well. I do not know where I went wrong. I tried my best to provide. Maybe not having a father made him like this. Sometimes I regret having him as my son, but I still love him. I do not love the man he turned out to be. I guess being a single mom was a curse after all. Here's the update. My son emailed me and said he wants to talk. I thought we should have a long conversation, but I set some ground rules. He can't criticize or call anyone names like last time and must be civil when I'm talking. He agreed. He came to my house yesterday at noon. My husband was at work and my daughter was in her room. He sat down and there were moments of awkward silence. He asked how I was and we had small talk. I asked about his wife, and that's when he started to cry. Not ugly crying, just a few tears. I could tell he wasn't doing well. I sat beside him and told him he could tell me everything. He said he was sorry for how he reacted before. He understands why I might be ashamed of him. He told me his marriage isn't going well. His wife is nowhere near as good as Ruth was. Ruth took care of all his needs and loved him, yet he treated Ruth like trash. He is constantly fighting with his new wife. He knows he messed up a lot. He learned this when he visited his daughter, and she kept calling John her dad. Bob tried to make her say dad, and she screamed, "You are not my dad." He saw how happy Ruth was with another man and realized what he had lost. I asked him, "Would you have missed Ruth if your wife did the same things for you like Ruth did?" He was silent. I told him it seems like he only kept Ruth in his life because she fulfilled his needs. I explained my relationship with his father. We were together not because we fulfilled each other's needs, but because we loved each other. That love didn't stop when one of us was vulnerable and weak. However, he left Ruth when she was vulnerable and needed him the most. His needs were fulfilled when Ruth was just a housewife with a small job. But as soon as she had no need, he discarded her. This hit him hard, and he started sobbing. He admitted he was a terrible person, but said he was manipulated by his wife. I lost my cool and yelled at him to stop blaming others for his mistakes. It was his decision to cheat, leave Ruth, and abandon his daughter. He can't run away from his responsibilities and wonder why no one is on his side. He hasn't learned from his mistakes because he still calls his wife vile names. This is the same woman he once said was better than Ruth. He had a choice not to cheat. He could have pushed her away when she tried to seduce him, but he didn't because he believed Ruth didn't care about him since she focused on her education. I raised him better than this. He's not just insulting my upbringing, he's also insulting his father. He will only suffer unless he takes full responsibility for his actions. He told me he knows I'm disappointed in him and wants to make things right. He feels trapped in a bad marriage because he thinks God is punishing him for how he treated his daughter and ex-wife. I told him if he wants to be a good man, he should start by apologizing to Ruth and being cordial with his daughter. I also told him that his daughter already sees John as her dad, so she might not call him dad anytime soon, but he should at least try. I told him to apologize to his sister as well. If he's really miserable in his marriage, he should get a divorce or try counseling. Whatever decision he makes, I will support him. But that doesn't mean I will forgive his wife because she also wronged Ruth. Unless she apologizes to Ruth, I can't see her as a decent person. Lastly, I told him that even though I'm very disappointed in him, I still love him. I will always guide him to do what is right. He will always be my son, but this is his chance to be a better man. I believe in second chances. This time, I hope he cleans up his act. I'm proud of him for acknowledging his wrongdoings. It has been 22 years since my husband died in an accident. I remember his last moments. He was too weak to speak, but he managed to say that he loved me and our children. We had a tradition of writing handwritten letters to each other once a year. In his last letter, he mentioned death. He told me that if death came, I should remember he loved me with all his heart and had no regrets. I guess he somehow knew it would be his last letter. I still have that letter and a place for him in my heart. He was not just my husband. He was the father of my children. How can I forget him? I didn't date for a long time. I focused on raising my 2 children and couldn't find anyone like my husband. I met my current husband when my daughter was 15 and my son was 18 and in college. My current husband is sweet, kind, gentle, and funny. He always has a positive outlook on life. After a long time, I felt butterflies in my stomach. I fell in love with him. We got married after dating for 4 years. He is also a widower with children who are a little older than mine and left home early. We have built a second home together. I am happy. I love this man and want to enjoy his company as much as I can. But lately, I have been having personal issues with my son, which made me miss my late husband even more. His belongings are still in my basement. I couldn't bring myself to throw them out. I still have his camera, pocket watch, Rubik's Cube, books, and most importantly, his letters. I miss him so much. Sometimes, I feel like I'm being unfair to my current husband. He is such a good man. I feel like I'm betraying him. I know it's not possible, but I try my best not to think about my late husband. But I do. It's hard not to. Am I betraying my current husband? Is this normal? I don't want to keep my current husband in the dark. I care about him. I respect him. He doesn't deserve a wife who betrays him. It's been a month since my last post. Things are fine now. First, my daughter moved out of my house. She and her fiancé were living with us to save money for their own place. I'm happy for her, but the house feels empty without her. Ruth and John are doing well. Ruth announced they're expecting a child and asked me to be the godmother. I'm overwhelmed and happy for them, though I'm not sure if I should be the godmother. Now about my son. He decided to separate from his wife. His marriage has problems, and he's trying to sort them out on his own. He's in therapy, and I support him. Things between him and my granddaughter are still a bit sour, but I'm helping as a mediator. He talked to Ruth about changing custody, but she said no because she doesn't trust him due to how he treated her in the past couple of years. Bob is sad, but I told him not to give up. He should still fulfill his duty as a father. He meets my granddaughter at my house. Right now, they're playing snakes and ladders in my living room. My son is really trying to be a better person, and I support that. I hope things will improve for him in the future. I talked to my husband about my feelings towards my late husband. He was surprisingly fine. He told me he understands that I miss him. Sometimes he misses his deceased wife, too. He still keeps a picture of her with him, and I don't mind. He said the pain we both went through is something no one else would understand, and he doesn't feel like I'm betraying him by missing my late husband. He was my family, and it's normal to miss family. I'm glad we had this talk. I fell in love with him even more.